Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. On the eve of the China-EU summit on July 24th, the EU has made another move, with the latest round of sanctions against Russia targeting several Chinese companies and banks. On July 18th, the EU announced sanctions against certain Chinese banks and 5 Chinese companies, citing their alleged involvement with Russia's military actions in Ukraine. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs hit back, stating that there will be countermeasures. Foreign Ministry spokesperson郭嘉昆emphasized that China has always opposed unilateral sanctions that lack a basis in international law and are not authorized by the UN Security Council. He reiterated that on the issue of the Ukraine crisis, China has consistently worked to promote peace and dialogue, has never provided lethal weapons to any party involved in the conflict, strictly controls the export of dual-use items, and that normal exchanges and cooperation between Chinese and Russian enterprises should not be disrupted or affected. Wei Jiakuan stated that China urges the European side to stop harming the legitimate interests of Chinese enterprises without any factual basis. China will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies. Frankly, these little tricks by the EU don't really mean much. First, the United States' attitude toward the Russia-Ukraine conflict has already clearly shifted. Second, as China-US relations are currently easing, the EU has already missed its chance to play the role of a key third-party force. Right now, the entire EU has found itself in an awkward position in its tariff negotiations with the United States, and this could even negatively impact the personal political futures of European politicians. On the other hand, take a look at Brazil, the major country in South America. On July 17th, the website of Foreign Policy magazine published an article pointing out that Trump's tariff threats against Brazil might actually help President Lula consolidate his political position. Earlier this month, U.S. President Trump wrote a letter to Brazilian President Lula, threatening to impose a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods. He even linked this issue to the charges against former Brazilian President Bolsonaro, attempting to use it as political leverage against Lula. Pagliolini, an assistant professor of history and international studies at Louisiana State University, wrote in an article published in Foreign Policy magazine that Brazil is not highly dependent on the U.S. market, and its trade volume with the U.S. is far less than that with China. Trump's threat to impose additional tariffs may be motivated by other reasons, but using tariffs as leverage not only does nothing to help Bolsonaro's situation, it could even give Lula more political support. Bolsonaro served as Brazil's president from 2019 to 2022. He is a close ally of Trump and is often referred to as the tropical Trump. On July 18th, the Brazilian Federal Supreme Court ruled that Bolsonaro had engaged in acts of coercing the judiciary, obstructing justice, and blatantly endangering national sovereignty, and ordered restrictive measures to be taken against him. Earlier, Trump announced that starting from August 1st, a 50% tariff would be imposed on all goods imported from Brazil. In his letter to Lula, he directly linked the tariff increase to Bolsonaro's case, urging Brazil to immediately drop the charges against Bolsonaro. The article points out that although Trump himself has successfully turned his legal troubles into political capital, this approach may not be easily exported to Brazil. In fact, there are already signs that Trump's decision to impose punitive tariffs on Brazil is undoubtedly a disaster for Bolsonaro's supporters in Brazil. The author believes that the evidence in the cases involving Bolsonaro is solid, and even his allies previously expected him to be convicted. Why is Trump now linking the tariff increases to Bolsonaro's issues? The author speculates there are 2 possibilities. He mentions that Brazil's finance minister once said that the U.S. tariff increases make almost no economic sense. Therefore, the first possibility is that Trump just wants to find an excuse to wield his tariff stick once again. Brazil's exports to the United States account for only 2% of its GDP, while its exports to China are more than twice that to the U.S. In this situation, American economist Paul Krugman also pointed out that Brazil's democratic system has almost no reasonable motivation to yield to the personal wishes of the U.S. president. China is Brazil's largest trading partner. According to statistics from China's General Administration of Customs, the bilateral trade volume between China and Brazil in 2024 was $188.17 billion, a year-on-year increase of 3.56%. And according to data from the Office of the United States Trade Representative, in 2024, the bilateral trade volume between the U.S. and Brazil was only $92 billion. Lula once said that Brazil's trade volume with the United States is not large, and that Brazil could survive even without trade with the U.S. Another possibility might be related to the BRICS summit that just concluded in Rio de Janeiro. The article states that Trump views cooperation among the Global South as a direct challenge to the political and economic hegemony of the United States, and has threatened to impose a 10% tariff on all countries that support anti-US policies of the BRICS nations. Meanwhile, at the summit, BRICS leaders emphasized their commitment to upholding a multipolar world order, and criticized US trade policies without naming the United States directly. Lula went even further at the summit, explicitly stating that the world does not need an emperor who manipulates global trade according to his personal whims. The author believes that the United States is trying to bully Brazil, the largest country in Latin America, as a warning to all BRICS nations, but in reality, this has only pushed Brazil further toward Russia and China. The article points out that Trump's approach is not only a policy blunder, but also politically very disadvantageous for Brazil's conservatives. As Lula enters the second half of his third presidential term, he was originally facing challenges such as declining approval ratings and a divided Congress. Now, thanks to Trump, Lula can send a message that unites all Brazilians. Brazil is a sovereign nation and will not be dictated to by others. On July 10, regarding the U.S. imposing tariffs, Lula emphasized that putting foreign interests above Brazil's sovereignty is unacceptable. He also questioned whether there isn't a single sensible person on Trump's team to remind him not to insult another country like this. The article concludes that the Make America Great Again movement and its Brazilian branch originally hoped to use this opportunity to show their strength, but now it has instead become a political gift for Lula. Now the Brazilian opposition is caught in a dilemma. Should they continue to be loyal to Bolsonaro, or should they protect the economic interests of his supporters? From the way Brazil and the European Union responded to Trump's tariff threats, a few observations can be made. First, Trump really is a special kind of helper for countries in the Global South. Being tough on Trump actually helps boost public approval. Second, China is the largest trading partner for the vast majority of countries in the Global South. When the U.S. squeezes them, it only pushes them to deepen cooperation with China, further weakening America's influence. Third, it's crucial for China to maintain its development. Only with economic strength can you have a voice. If the trade volume between China and Brazil weren't so large, Brazil wouldn't have the confidence it does when dealing with the U.S. Take a look at the only anti-China vanguard in ASEAN, Philippines. They've been jumping up and down, stirring up trouble in the South China Sea. Now that China-U.S. relations have relatively eased, a recent Chinese policy toward the Philippines has triggered a strong reaction from them. On July 18, China's Ministry of Education issued the 2025 No. 2 Study Abroad Warning, advising students planning to study in the Philippines to strengthen their safety risk assessments due to the recent deterioration of public security and frequent crimes against Chinese citizens in the Philippines. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian also commented on this, saying that recently, public security in the Philippines has been poor, with frequent crimes and harassment targeting Chinese citizens. The Chinese government issues study abroad warnings out of a sense of responsibility, as a reasonable measure to protect the safety and rights of Chinese students studying abroad. China once again reminds students going to the Philippines to carefully assess the risks, and also urges the Philippine side to take concrete measures to ensure the safety, dignity, and legal rights of Chinese students in the Philippines. In a statement released on July 20, the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs refuted China's security risk advisory, claiming that the advisory misrepresented the actual situation in the Philippines and expressing hope that China would make the necessary corrections. The statement firmly asserted that all incidents involving crime, including those involving Chinese nationals, other foreign citizens, or cases where foreigners commit crimes against their compatriots, are handled in accordance with the law by the relevant law enforcement agencies. The Philippine government has always acted in good faith, communicating with foreign embassies, including the Chinese embassy, regarding such cases. The Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs also stated that it has expressed its concerns to the Chinese side through diplomatic channels about the alleged inaccuracies in the advisory, and hopes that China will make the necessary corrections. It asserted that the Philippines remains committed to engaging in constructive discussions with China on matters of mutual concern. There is a sense of stubbornness in the statement from the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs. While they claim they have done nothing wrong and even shift the blame onto the Chinese side, in the end, they still propose to discuss the matter with China. This shows that China's tightening of policies for students going to the Philippines has clearly dealt a blow to their economy. In conclusion, it's not that China lacks ways to deal with the Philippines, it's just a matter of taking action at the right time.